Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into one of the most complex and honestly fascinating international standoffs happening right now, the diplomatic crisis between India and Canada. But we aren't just looking at the politics. We're going to uncover the massive economic engine, the actual trade links behind these nations that keeps them bound together.
So, here's the big question we need to ask. What really happens when two democratic nations with layers upon layers of economic ties just freeze? They recall diplomats, they suspend visas. It sounds like a total system shock, right? Well, the crazy paradox here is that while the diplomats pack up and go home, the cargo ships, they just keep on sailing. To get the real story, we have to look past the headlines and examine the foundational trade links these countries have spent literally decades building.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the diplomatic deep freeze, move into the trade backbone, look at human capital and energy, touch on the friction and security concerns, and finally, wrap up with the pragmatic path forward.
Okay, Part 1. The diplomatic deep freeze.
To understand the freeze, you have to look at the spark that set it off. Tensions absolutely spiked after the Canadian government made allegations regarding the killing of Khalistani separatist Hardeep Singh Nijjar. India, on the flip side, firmly rejected these allegations, calling them politically motivated and saying there was no credible evidence. What followed was a severe, immediate diplomatic freeze. Diplomats were expelled on both sides, visa services were temporarily suspended, which, caused massive logistical nightmares right out of the gate. We're looking at a serious standoff over sovereignty and security that put billions of dollars in trade at an incredibly uncomfortable standstill.
Now, what makes today's tension so striking is the incredibly long history of trust between these two. Diplomatic relations were established way back in 1947, right after India's independence. It was built on shared Commonwealth ties and parliamentary democracy. In those early years, Canada was actually a key contributor to India's development, providing food, education, even nuclear assistance. And then, when India went through its massive economic liberalization in 1991, that sparked an economic boom that just cemented these relations even further. So these aren't strangers, they are very old partners.
Which brings us to Part 2. The trade backbone.
These two economies fit together like a giant puzzle. Canada provides incredibly vital raw materials. Actually, fun fact, a massive chunk of the pulses and lentils consumed every single day in India come directly from Canadian farms. Canada also supplies potash fertilizers, wood products, and minerals. And on the flip side, India supplies advanced manufactured goods and services. We're talking world-class pharmaceuticals, engineering goods, cutting-edge IT services, textiles, chemicals. Basically, they're trading exactly what the other side desperately needs to function.
But it's not just about, shipping containers back and forth. There is massive cross-border corporate investment linking these economies every single day. Thousands of Canadian companies have poured serious investments into India to tap into its booming market. At the same time, major Indian corporations are operating incredibly successfully right inside Canada. Their economies are structurally glued together at a corporate level. Unraveling that politically, it's incredibly difficult, if not totally impossible.
Let's move on to Part 3, Human Capital and Energy.
So, more than 3 lakh, that's over 300,000 Indian students are currently studying in Canadian universities. This isn't just some casual educational exchange. It is a literal economic pillar. These students contribute billions of dollars to Canada's economy every year. They support local businesses, they drive the housing markets, and they basically sustain a lot of these educational institutions.
And when you look at the broader diaspora, the scale is just mind-blowing. There are nearly 2 million people of Indian origin living in Canada today. 2 million. This community is an absolutely essential bridge between the two nations. They are a driving force in Canadian politics, business, healthcare, tech, academia, you name it. There are even several members of parliament and cabinet ministers in Canada with Indian roots. The human connection here runs incredibly deep.
Beyond the people, there's a fundamental strategic alignment in energy. Think about it. Canada's vast natural reserves, uranium, oil, natural gas, critical minerals, perfectly match India's massive needs. India is the world's fastest growing major economy. To keep that up, they need incredibly reliable energy sources for long-term growth, to fuel their manufacturing ambitions, and crucially, to navigate the clean energy transition. Canada has exactly what India needs to power its future.
In that future, it's highly collaborative. The science and tech cooperation between these two is heavily invested in tomorrow's industries. We're looking at joint efforts in artificial intelligence, clean energy solutions, biotechnology, space research, and advanced agriculture. This really proves that their mutual investments aren't just stuck in past agreements. They are actively building the technological future together, side by side.
All right, part 4, friction and security concerns. Now, having established the massive stakes here, we have to look objectively at the friction. The challenges are complex and deeply rooted. India has repeatedly raised major security concerns about extremist groups advocating for Khalistan operating from Canadian soil. They're highlighting serious issues like extremist financing, radicalization, and direct threats against Indian diplomats. India's stance is pretty clear. Freedom of speech shouldn't be a shield for promoting violence. On the Canadian side of the equation, you have domestic electoral politics heavily influencing foreign policy, which, as you can imagine, complicates diplomatic engagement quite a bit. It's a highly volatile mix of international security concerns colliding with domestic political pressures.
And this brings us right back to our main theme, the economic impact. Because these political and security frictions, they do not exist in a vacuum. Thanks to this deep deficit in diplomatic trust, vital economic negotiations, specifically the Early Progress Trade Agreement, have significantly slowed down. It's a classic ripple effect. When political trust drops, the economic machinery naturally gears down right along with it.
So how do we get out of this? That brings us to part 5, the pragmatic path forward. The simple truth is, neither side can afford to just walk away from this relationship. Look at Canada's immense value to India. Canada is a G7 powerhouse. It's rich in those critical minerals we just talked about. It's an advanced tech partner. It's a huge destination for Indian students, and it's a key stakeholder in the Indo-Pacific. If India wants to continue its rise on the global stage, Canada is an incredibly valuable asset to have in its corner.
And conversely, Canada absolutely needs India. I mean, India is the world's fastest-growing major economy. That represents a massive, highly lucrative consumer market for Canadian goods. Plus, India is a trusted partner in the geopolitically vital Indo-Pacific region, and obviously the cultural homeland of a massive and super influential Canadian diaspora. For its long-term economic strategy, Canada simply requires a strong relationship with India.
So, what's the actual game plan to restore this? Well, first, there has to be mutual respect for sovereignty. Second, both nations really need to enhance intelligence sharing and counterterrorism cooperation to objectively address those deep security concerns. Third, they've got to maintain open, constructive diplomatic dialogue, even when it's super uncomfortable. And finally, if they can manage those first 3, they hit step 4, reviving those stalled trade negotiations and getting this massive economic engine running at full speed again.
I really want to highlight this specific quote from the analysis because it just hits the nail on the head. Economic realities encourage both countries to maintain constructive engagement despite political disagreements. That is the absolute core of the whole shebang. The billion-dollar trade, the critical resources, the massive exchange of human capital. It essentially forces pragmatic engagement. The economic gravity between these two is just way too strong to ignore.
Which leaves us with a pretty heavy final thought to ponder. As you watch these incredibly complex global dynamics unfold, ask yourself, how do modern nations truly balance their absolute, non-negotiable national security concerns with the vital economic and democratic ties that literally keep their countries running? It's a very delicate tightrope, and India and Canada are walking it right now. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep exploring, and I'll catch you in the next one.